Kalamalka-rannsóknarstöðin. Kalamalka-rannsóknarstöðin í Vernon er miðstöð kynbóta og erfðarannsókna fyrir innlandssvæði Bresku-Kólumbíu. Þar eru stundaðar rannsóknir og kynbætur og risalerki, blágreni, degli, stafafuru og hvítfuru. Hópurinn sem heimsótti stöðina í september 2013 fékk þar góðar móttökur fræðslu starfsemina. Við Kalamalka-stöðina eru víðáttumiklir frægarðar, einkum af risalerki. Árleg gróðursetning trjáa í Bresku-Kólumbíu nemur 275 milljónum trjáplantna og þar af eru 70% kynbætt. Gróðursetning risalerkis hefur verið að aukast og nam 15 milljónum plantna í fyrra. Allt kynbætt efni.
When we started our program, the main thrust was to produce seed. So we went over and selected a large number of trees over in East Cooties and the West Cooties and brought them back here and grafted them. We didn't know how long it was going to take us to get progeny tests in the ground. So we thought, let's get the seed orchards, get them in there, and then we'll get the progeny test established as fast as we can to do some roguing. So what happened was we were able to get enough seed from the wild stand trees so that we could establish our progeny test fairly quickly. And so we had, 8 to 10 year progeny test information. So it was time to rogue these guys. But in the meantime, they just started to produce flowers. And the problem was, well, okay, we're just starting to get seed from these things. We can knock out the dogs, the really poor growing families, or the clones, and replace them with the younger, more vigorous hybrid breeding value pair. What they did was they bud grafted them, and so this was the original.
That was the original tree.
Parent that was up there, and they just put a bud graft right down at the bottom. It was growing up like this. In the meantime, they were collecting all the seed from the older graft that was on there, and then once the third one got up big enough like this, then they cut the old one out, and then this. So and that's what this tree is. And they did it quite a bit through this area. Okay. So it was a good way of improving the genetic quality of the seed that was coming out of the orchard and maintaining the production.
Spring bud graft?
Yeah. They're clonal rows.
Ah, so each row is cloned?
So each row is a different clone. Keep them short to keep the crops down low for easy picking and all that. The seed is for the most part completely outcrossed. There's very little selfing in these things. So they're completely unrelated rows. What happens when we top them is that it really stimulates these droopy secondary branches. So we see these are all pollen buds here for next year. And so pollen is not, once we started topping them and bringing everything down, we started to get all kinds of, so you can see the pollen, these are all pollen buds that are formed out here.
I think also it's also a matter of age. I mean, I've got this, really what's the second generation orchard going now in the greenhouse. The first generation orchard was quick to start a little flowering, and then just like you said, the females came first and the pollen came later. By the end of it, when the trees were all kind of had outgrown their pots and so on, then I got the big pollen crops. But then I was ready to get rid of about half the clones and graft anew and make a new composition. And what I did was I started making hybrids, which is what I'm doing now. I'm making a European Sukachevi hybrid, which has turned out to be the best for us.
Even when they do burst bud early, there can be snow on the ground, there can be cold events, but the site is sloped down. So the cold air just flows off it. We've been able to collect cones here every year, and we rarely ever lose any flowers to these early or these late cold events. And it's really quite good. On the site we've got 2 western larch orchards. This one, and we'll walk down and see the other one. But we've done to me, this western larch is probably our most successful breeding program, tree breeding program in BC. In terms of gain that we've achieved per year. We started this program in the late 80s. And right now we're just about, we've got BC seed orchards are in full production. Just about all the seed that we plant or the trees that we plant are from these orchards. And the progeny tests are 20 years old now. And we've just about completed our breeding, our crossing program to produce second generation material. So we'll be putting out our second generation full sit tests in probably 2 or 3 years max. So in terms of gain per year, it's been very, very successful.
Yep.
And then we come along and we just graft it on there. So we graft the tree that we really want along all these rows. That's what it is. And we let them sit in these nursery beds for 2 or 3 years.
So you graft them inside, or you graft them out here?
Here. You graft them right out here. Douglas fir is great. You start grafting Douglas fir in pots, and it just doesn't even. But when we graft them out here in the beds like this, it works great. These are coastal Douglas fir.
Okay. Wow.
And what we're finding is in our breeding and testing programs is that if we create hybrids between coastal and interior varieties, they grow really well, especially on these low elevation warm sites in the southern interior. And so we're incorporating some of our high breeding value coastal Douglas fir parents into our interior breeding programs. And some of the area that you drove through the Fraser Canyon, through the canyon, we've got some parents from there too. So we find that if we start crossing them, they bring the growth potential of those coastal guys, but they've still got the cold hardiness of the interior varieties. And on these mild, low elevation sites, they do very, very well. Like I'm sure we can grow some of these hybrids. We can grow a tree like that in about 25 years.
Áhugaverð kynbótatilraun snýst að finna blágreni sem ver sig gegn ranabjöllutegund sem ræðst á toppsprotagrenisins og drepur þá með því að éta innan úr þeim. Við það aflagast trén. Fundist hafa blágrenitré sem eru nánast ónæm fyrir ranabjöllunni vegna óvenjuþykks barkar á toppsprotunum. Verið að prófa varnir afkvæma þessari trjáa með því að setja ranabjöllurnar á þau, en til þess þarf að safna og ala upp helling af ranabjöllum. Voru þær í uppeldi á grenisbrotum í plastfötum í stöðinni.
And so what we're doing now is the way we screen these things to raise populations of weevils. We raise them and put them on trees, and that way everything in our test plantation gets a nice uniform attack. If you left it up to nature to do, these infestations start in a small area, and then they go out in waves or concentric circles or waves or whatever. So you don't get a uniform attack across the plantation. So this way we raise the weevils and put them on the plantations we want. We get a nice uniform attack. And so what we do when we raise them is collect they lay eggs in the top of the trees, and we go in the late spring, cut the tops off, bring them in. We've got these big cages here that we put all the branches, we stuff all the branches in. And the eggs, the larvae mature, and then they come out as when they're mature. They exit, they build all these little exit holes. So we end up with big cages with thousands and thousands of weevils in them. When we finish, when they're all out, we put them in these buckets, and when they're in the fall, we'll take them out and release them. And so you can see the weevils right there. Yeah. You can see their big noses, their proboscis that sticks out. That's what they feed on. They stick. But Giselle, she's our weevil expert. She raises them, but she puts food and a little bit of water in them so we can keep them alive through the summer, and then we take them out and put them on. They're hard to. They're tricky little devils. As soon as you touch them, they play dead. See, he's playing dead. You can see his nose. And that's what they stick in the tree, and then they lay their eggs in the feeding holes. In the spring, they crawl up from the duff. Yeah. They crawl up to the top of the tree, right, and they feed on the top. They feed along the ridges, so, and then when they're finished feeding, or when they they all congregate on the top, and they mate. and then the female goes into the old feeding holes, and that's where she oviposits her eggs. And then they cover them up, they plug them up with frass, and then the eggs just hatch. And so that's when we come along, and then when the eggs hatch, the larvae feed. They mine down the stem, and that's what kills the top. And it's such a problem here that we virtually stopped planting Sitka spruce on the coast because of weevils. It really is quite a problem.
So it's more of a problem on Sitka spruce than it is on interior spruce?
Yeah, there's some. And so what we've been doing is developing or identifying all these mechanisms for resistance, and there's quite a few. We've identified about 5 mechanisms of resistance. So yeah. And then we identify them, and then we put the resistant parents in the seed orchards and let them replicate.
Þetta var sem sagt stórfróðleg heimsókn á fyrirmyndar rannsóknarstöð sem vill svo til að nákvæmlega jafn stór og rannsóknarstöð Skógræktar ríkisins á Mógilsá, bæði hvað varðar mannskap og húsakost.